When I left this budget in June for DHS, I thought that we had DC General Family Shelter funded to full capacity year-round in the FY12 budget. I thought that we had avoided, I thought that we had our emergency low barrier shelter funded for both hyperthermia and hypothermia seasons. And I thought that we had permanent supportive housing units funded for continuation. There wasn't any new money for new units. I don't know what the history, I think Mississippi Avenue took some years to put into place, and so that was probably more of a pipeline issue rather than new money. And we had some, I think we might have had some cuts in rapid housing, and rent supplement certainly took a cut and so forth. But generally speaking, I thought that we had done pretty well. And now, I have to say that we went through the budget process without a whole lot of discussion of hotels. Now, you weren't here, Director Burns, but Mr. Swan was here, and he will remember that. And so I don't recall there being any particular funding made available in the FY12 budget for hotels. I don't know if, was there money in the FY11 budget targeted for hotels?
No.
Well, you see that, so we continued the FY11 into the FY12, which maybe as much as anything else explains the bind that we're in. What is your comment on all of that? I mean, first, you know, did I accurately state what the budget situation was?
Yes.
My understanding was very similar, just a little bit different. And I believed right up until the last few days that the funding that was provided would be sufficient to meet the capacity in all of the programs that you mentioned. I think where I had a somewhat different understanding from that was in the family shelter, that we would take and not be placing families during the summer months, and that we would build up the capacity so that we would be able to use DC General as our primary hypothermia placement setting. So it was somewhat confusing, but I thought that we would have vacancies at DC General when hypothermia season started, and that both with those vacancies and with continuing to move families into the other elements of the pipeline, housing and all throughout the year, we'd be able to meet the family shelter capacity within the budget that was provided.
Right.
It's the new...
Director, with respect, Director Burns, I don't know where you got that message from, because it certainly did not come from me. I mean, and I think Mr. Swan will remember our conversations where I wanted to see DC General operate on a year-round basis. I thought it was funded to be operating at a full capacity on a year-round basis. So we don't have to, you know, it's now water under the bridge or over the dam, whichever one you want.
Can I add something?
Pardon me?
Yeah, I just wanted to add something to that.
Well, let me just finish my sentence.
Sure.
And then I'm very anxious to have all your comments, Mr. Swan. But I've proceeded on the assumption, and as it turned out, not a valid assumption, that we were filling the vacancies at DC General. And so I'm glad we're doing it now. We have a problem to deal with, but I'm glad we've reversed that policy. Mr. Swan?
Yeah, just to provide some background context, that the funding, the $17 million funding for the FY12 budget, was slated to do just that, just as you stated. What changed things somewhat is during the previous winter season, of course, as we've explained, there were families placed in hotels. At the end of the season, there were still approximately about 30 families still remaining in hotels, and the priority was to get those families out of hotels into shelter, because that wasn't budgeted for, and we didn't want to continue to exceed and accumulate expenses going beyond the hypothermia season. So the reason why, going back to April 1st, 2011, that placements weren't, new families were not placed, is because we're in the process of placing those families out of hotels into DC General. And that process didn't get completed until early July of 2011. So from April 1st to July 2011, we were placing the families from the hotels as vacancies were created.
From what date? From what date?
From April 1st to about the first week of July. So what we were doing was placing families into DC General as vacancies became available.
But then you stopped.
Yes, and then what happened is we actually started the winter planning process probably sometime in late May, and that process moved through obviously the end of August. By the time that we were able to place all the families from hotels into DC General, that's when we were at the final stages of the winter plan preparation, and that's when we determined that there would be a need for these additional 57 units. And that's when those decisions were made in terms of the capacity.
But, you know, I thank you. I appreciate that. The winter plan, though, has told us whether, you know, it proves true or not, but they have said that our capacities for men and women, low barrier, emergency shelters for the winter period are adequate. Am I right?
Yes.
I don't know that we had any similar numbers for youth. Did we?
No, we didn't, and actually that's interesting because Maggie Riley, who wasn't able to give her testimony, has been participating in the ICH, and so we didn't get provided any particular numbers as it relates to youth. But at our last interagency council meeting for operations and logistics, she did mention that there may be some additional capacity needs for the winter, and I asked her to give me an estimate of what that was. So I'm just waiting on that feedback.
It should be in the winter plan.
Okay.
We should have this in the winter plan. I mean, this is how young people have been kind of left out, you know, because now what we're proceeding to do now, obviously, is to focus in on what are unanticipated, I guess you could say, unanticipated needs relating to families. But independent youth, there may be unanticipated needs there that we need to be aware of.
Right.
And so I don't know. But I think where we are right now, to kind of cut to the quick, is that we have a winter plan before us which is valid for certain purposes, but very questionable for other purposes. And the very questionable part is obviously for families. I mean, I don't feel right now that I can rely on what the winter plan is projecting, which was an increase of 18 families. Do I remember that right?
Yes.
18 families. And maybe it's right, but it looks like it's not right. And I think that what we need to do is to figure out just where we are. Now, the place to start is with the budget. Did you fully spend the FY11 homeless budget?
They're doing our OCFO are doing the final reconciliation now, so we should know within the next few days or by early next week.
The total homeless budget is how much, federal and local?
For FY11?
For FY11.
Was about $112 million.
For FY12?
About $99 million.
Okay, because we still had a cut there that we had to sustain due to the loss of the federal
dollars, yes.
Okay. Now, in terms of the FY11, the $111 million, you have no sense at this point as to how much of that was spent and how much of it wasn't spent?
No, I don't have the exact numbers, but I should have that probably tomorrow.
Because, you know, we had testimony by Kelly Sweeney McShane from the Community of Hope raising questions about whether that as of June 2011, DC had spent only 62% of its HUD grant.
Yeah, and you're talking about the HPRP HUD grant, and that's a grant that spans until July of 2012. So it's not money that had to be spent during the FY11 fiscal year.
So there's money left there to spend into the future.
Yes.
Well, that's good news. So we're not leaving that money on the table.
Right.
But I am very interested in knowing how we're doing in terms of our local dollar spending.
Yeah, well, I can tell you we typically spend all our local dollars because if there is any unspent dollars, it's typically the federal dollars, which we can then carry over into the new fiscal year.
Okay. Then at this point, I think we should view this as a budget crisis. It's about to become a human crisis, but it's a budget crisis. Do you have any sense of how many additional families we're going to have to accommodate that are unanticipated by the winter plan?
It's hard to make that that assumption at this point. I think what we try to assume.
But Mr. Swan, forgive me for interrupting you, but we're here. You know, we've got to have a different answer than that, with all due respect, because we're on the verge of this happening, and we know that the numbers are difficult to come up with, but we've got to do what we can. I mean, that's what the winter plan is all about. That's what this hearing is all about.
Right. And what we've done is, on two sides. One, what we have anticipated is that if the 57 units that were in the plan to be vacant are not vacant, we have anticipated that we'll need to replace those with likely hotel units. That we have anticipated.
Is DHS willing to consider other options?
Of course.
In other words, I presented 3 options, you know, which are obvious. They're just common sense. I mean, there are 2 floors of DC General that we're not using that we could open in full or part. There are perhaps other facilities within the system, although our review of this census suggests that they're all full, but there may be some other facilities that we could increase capacity at. Or we could create new facilities. I mean, those are the 3 options that I have in mind. Maybe there's other options I haven't thought of, but something's got to give, because we've already projected 18 unanticipated families in the scheme of things, and you think it's going to be much higher. So is there a way of analyzing the various options that are on the table?
Yeah.